Do you like the idea of having your own podcast? Or perhaps you already have one that's up and running, but perhaps struggling to take it to the next level? Honestly, from my experience, it can be tough. Figuring out the tech and continuously coming up with engaging content can feel like a never-ending battle. It takes time, money, consistency, discipline, and patience. Arguably, all of our most valuable resources have to go into podcasting. And that's why I'm thrilled to welcome Jason Allan Scott to the podcast. Jason isn't just a successful podcaster, he's a serial entrepreneur and recognized authority in the podcast industry. He has built and sold multiple successful podcast channels, he's spoken at major industry events, and he's been featured in top media outlets for his innovative approaches to podcast monetization and audience growth. So he's here to share his secrets on mastering the podcasting game. From maintaining creative energy to effectively monetizing your episodes, Jason has fine-tuned methods that ensure your podcast not only survives, but thrives. Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual, and I'm joined by Jason Allan Scott. Jason, great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. That's a heck of an intro. I don't know if AI wrote that or you did, but whoever did, congratulations. It's great work.
Good, excellent processes, utilizing AI and humans is exactly how we get that done. And at some point, perhaps I'll do an episode where I dive into the SOP that we have of how get this stuff done. Yeah. But thank you. I appreciate it. From a master such as yourself, that's quite the accolade. So let's go and dive a bit about your journey and why you've chosen podcasts as your specialism and so on, before I dive deep into asking a load of questions about how to get it right.
Never been asked that question before. That's a fantastic question, which is unreal because I've done so many of these over the last 9 years. I don't think I chose podcasting. I think that what happened is a series of events that, like Steve Jobs famously said, make sense looking back, but at the time seemed completely and utterly based on what was convenient at the time, right? I studied radio broadcasting, so it would kind of make sense that I'd be in podcasting. I worked for a major radio station. I worked for smaller local radio stations. I studied media. As I mentioned, I worked for a guy called Randall Abrams, who's like the Simon Cowell of radio. And in some ways that definitely helped. As I said, I did radio broadcasting certification when I passed with distinctions. And I was a public speaker from the age of 12. Wow. So there's a couple of things we could be, well, that makes sense. But if you had asked me the question when I started, is that why you're starting a podcast? It was 9 years ago. It was 2015. I was starting a business, a brand new industry. I was turning 40, and I'd just been told I couldn't stay in the industry that I was in, where I was doing incredibly well. And I thought it would be really interesting to do a podcast that was completely audio, that just simply told you the story of what it was like to start again, what it was like, the conversation that I would have, the learning process, my execution, what made me different, why was I successful in the past. And this is going to sound very bright, but I thought it was guaranteed to be a success. So I was like, the business will be a success, whether the podcast will be or won't, it'll be a success in time. Because just like I'd love to have been a fly in the wall when Steve Jobs was in the garage with Steve Wozniak building the first Mac, I thought people would be able to go back to this moment in time and listen to my podcast and hear me come up with this idea and test the problem and test the pain and talk to the customers and talk to investors and build this business. And the surprise was, spoiler alert, is that the business was an absolute fiasco. It was my first or my second major failure in my career. But the podcast was a massive success, and that hit me in podcasting. And that said, like, I have been wined and dined by Snap, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, and I've asked them directly. In fact, there's a YouTube video where I'm at breakfast with TikTok. The two representatives from TikTok from Dublin who flew down for the breakfast. And I asked them directly, how do we win? How, as a small business owner, do you win on TikTok? Because I'll stop telling people podcast is the greatest medium for your business if you tell me how to win. And the person turns around and flippantly says, only 2 people in Beijing know the answer to that question, so I can't help you. And that's why I'm pro podcaster, because I think anyone win in podcast.
That's awesome. I love that. And there's so much I could dive into there, but I I do think it's interesting that the way that you set up that first podcast that you were talking about there, where it's sort of exploring the journey of the business you created, I suspect would have been way less successful had it been a successful business. Like if that had basically followed a business that, particularly if it had been like most successful businesses, where it doesn't suddenly become an overnight success worth billions of dollars, but just like hard graphs and it kind of gets there and marginal gains, and over time that builds. And as a result, you've got a serious enterprise there. I suspect that would kind of do nothing. Whereas, as you say, a podcast that it really follows the journey of someone who creates a business that ultimately fails, despite seemingly doing the steps in the right order and interviewing customers and so on. That's probably
what it was. I also think a lot of people thought I was joking. I think a lot of people thought this is a mockumentary. This is like The Office. This guy isn't this stupid, or he's not really paying a CTO he met online this ridiculous salary and has no idea how to code. Brilliant. Or he really paid 3 people to go to different conferences around the world and interview them and ask questions about this technology. Like, I think, especially reading I had over 60 LinkedIn messages when I closed up the first podcast down, season 1. I ended up obviously doing season 2, but at the time I was like, we're done. The podcast is done. The business is done. We're completely done. And all the messages were like, wow, I learned so much, but also it was so entertaining. It was interesting, you asking the dumb questions. And we thought it was funny that you purposely asked dumb questions. And I was thinking, I did not purposely ask dumb questions. All of my questions, they just happened to be dumb. And so yeah, I think that helped a lot as well. And that definitely helped me. Even now, and I say this to everyone as one of my biggest pieces of advice, you either come in and be honest with people and say, I am a learner, and I will learn with you as we go through this show or this business together. Or you come and you say, I am an expert, and I'm going to prove to you I'm an expert on episode after episode after episode. But you can't say you're a beginner and then posture as if you're an expert any more than you can come in as an expert and suddenly go, oh, I didn't actually know that. Oh, because that makes you look foolish, and then you lose the trust of your audience.
So true. So true. No, I think that's great advice. And what a terrific advert for that series on your podcast. Presumably still available. Can we?
Still available on all good platforms where you can find me.
Excellent.
The Guest List podcast, still on Spotify. It's not on Apple anymore, but it's still on Spotify.
The Guest List podcast.
That's right.
Fantastic. Well, people can check that one out after this episode. I think that provides such a useful insight and a reminder for all of us as business owners and leaders and so on, is that the path of business is not an easy one, and we're often surprised at the results that we get, and that the journey that you go on is much more important than that destination. And it's important to be open to how that journey unfolds. In your case, you ended up with one unsuccessful business, but as a result, many more possibilities for successful businesses out the back of it. I think that's really, really powerful. So this, as I say, there's so many questions I could dive into on that history alone, but in the interest of time and wanting to focus on particularly some of the advice that is going to most help people that are out there, particularly those that are considering doing podcasts and so on. One of the big things I see for either people who are trying to start one, or have recently started one, or have had a bit of experience with it, is that creating something of this magnitude or seeming magnitude, creating a podcast that, particularly if it's got quite a frequent sort of schedule to it and so on, can be pretty daunting, overwhelming, stressful, etc. How, based on your experiences, how have you managed that? What are the kind of strategies that you recommend for others to deal with that?
Whether you're starting a podcast or starting a business, I work backwards, right? And I don't live a stressful life. I'm very, very particular about this idea that if you give me 8 hours to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend 6 hours sharpening the axe and finding the right tree. That's the most important thing. I mean, a lot of business owners who talk to me about how they're struggling, and they'll be telling me they earn $1 million or $2 million, and I'll say, great, like how much are you taking out? And they'll say, oh, $3,000, $4,000. I think, how many staff members do you have? And they're like 60, 75. How many officers who did it? And I think this is nuts. Why would you choose to run a business like this? It's just the amount of stress you put on yourself. And I see the same thing with podcasting. They come on and they go, I want to get these people, and I want to do, like you said, I want to do twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I want to get this out, and I've got to have this many downloads. And I'll say, stop. Let's work backwards. And let's break it down into bite-sized chunks. So let's begin with podcasts in seasons, right? You can either be Netflix or HBO. For those that don't know the difference, HBO says, we have an amazing idea. We believe we have an amazing cast. We're going to put a lot of money behind it, and we're going to run 22 episodes. We're going to have this beautiful arc of character that maybe starts off not knowing what they're doing and then finds out what they're doing and then meets the right people to help them do it, then has this terrible thing happen and then gets over this terrible thing and then finally makes it in the end. And if it's a failure, we will never do that show again. We will act like it never existed. Netflix says, how about we just do 8 to 10 episodes? That's it. And we test an idea. And then we look at the data. Maybe it was the storyline that didn't work, but people loved the actor and they loved the name and they loved the concept. Maybe it was the chemistry between 2 or 3 actors. Maybe it was the difference. And I said to people, that's how you start. So you go, this is season 1, and our only metric for success is finding our audience. Harley Davidson said it best. People loved motorbikes before Harley Davidson. People who loved motorbikes just didn't know that Harley Davidson existed. So all they had to do was get in front of people who like motorbikes and say, hey, we're Harley Davidson. That's how I tell everyone to start a podcast. If your podcast is about business leadership or growing wealth, there's millions of people out there that are already interested in growing a podcast or growing wealth or running a business. Know where they are, know what they care about, know what they're interested in. And your first job is to make content that entertains first and educates second. And there's a reason for that. And has a weekly schedule, weekly cadence, like you said, a publishing schedule, preferably on a Wednesday. So Monday, you can say what's coming up. Tuesday, you can say who's coming up. Wednesday, you can say we're live. Thursday, you can say here's the magic moment that occurred in yesterday's episode. Friday, you can say, oh my gosh, here's what people are saying about what happened on Wednesday's episode. And now you've got a promotion schedule. And like you talked about SOPs before we pressed record, start creating an SOP just like you would for a book, a series of processes that will allow you to run your business and your podcast. And those two should be the same. Your podcast should be a Trojan horse to everything you do. It allows you access. And if you ask any successful person, how did you do as well as you did? And you keep asking the question, it'll eventually come down to access. I had access to my audience. I had access to the pain. I had access to capital. I had access to attention. I had access to great advertising, marketing, copyright, etc. Always, right? So it's access. So I say to people, work backwards. So we're going to start with 10 episodes, nice, easy season that also give us a lot of data to work out what to do in the next one, to double down on what works and delete what didn't. We've got 10 episodes to find our audience. We've got 10 episodes to delight our audience. We've got 10 episodes to see if we've made a difference. These are the D's to our audience. Did they engage? Did they subscribe? Did they give us 5 stars? Not 2, not 3, not 4, 5. Did they leave a comment? Because that's difficult. To pick up your phone, go to subscribe, go to 5 stars, go into comments, write a word. It takes action. And the difference between a listener and a fan, or a viewer and a fan, is a fan will go through massive action to show you their support. I embarrassingly listen to Taylor Swift, but I'm not a fan of Taylor Swift because I've never bought an album. I've never paid for a concert ticket. I've never got a t-shirt. I've never supported her art or artistry. Hence, I'm not a fan. I have made a lot of money in podcasting by creating strong fanships. Where when I launched a book, my first book, The Entrepreneur, I sold 55,000 copies with less than 55,000 listeners, which means people were buying mass amounts of books to support me and keep the podcast going. When I started, speaking, I got booked for lots of talk, and I just finding ways to monetize that. I think it was 7, then it was 11, then it was 27, then it was 31. Now it's 38 different ways to monetize, and a lot of that starts on like the 5th season, which is monetizing your fans. Once you've made enough fans, once those fans love you enough because you've given so much value. So how do you make it less stressful? Number 1, you start with 10 episodes because that's easy. Anyone can do 10 episodes. 2, you work backwards. You say, my only goal for the season is to find my audience, is to know where they are, what they listen to, what they care about, what problems they have that I can solve on an episode that preferably is about 27 minutes long. Who do they already respect that I can get on the show so I can steal a little bit of that respect, that care, and that like, right? I can do a bit of social hijacking, social proofing. And then from that, I will work out that in second season how to continue with that. So breaking these down into small steps and then looking at data, right? Stephen Covey said, without data, we can't manage. Without manage, we can't move. So what's the data? Perhaps a monologue episode did really well. Well, in your next season, do 2 monologue episodes where you just talk to the mic. There's no guest. Guest episodes did really well where it was you and another expert. Guest experts with you and dinner did really well where you were teaching. Great, do another episode of that. And then again, measure it on 10 episodes. And there's normally an arc. The arc is season 1, find your audience. Season 2, delight your audience. Season 3, monetize your audience. That is the normal, if you get everything right. Sometimes it takes 4 seasons, 5 seasons, etc. But just by getting, as we talked about again before we press record, just by getting past episode 3, you're better than 50% of all podcasts.
Yeah.
So just having that, and then also don't make it hard for yourself. Don't do a live podcast. Record 10 episodes up front before you press publish. Now you have a bank. You have 10 weeks to get your next season ready. You also have 10 weeks to focus on one metric, promotion. Right? I'm just going to promote for 10 solid weeks. I'm not going to have to do anything else because all I'm trying to do is find my audience. Every week I'm promoting, I'm creating content, I'm creating storylines, I'm creating a newsletter, I'm creating a blog, I'm creating a thread, I'm creating a Twitter storm, and I've booked it into my diary, and I know exactly how long it's going to take me and how many fit and attention, as you mentioned, and break that down into small steps. Maybe you do one in the morning, one in the afternoon, one in the evening, and that's it. It's practice, it's habits, it's not work, and it's not stressful because you know exactly what you're doing and you're just repeating it week after week.
That's amazing. I love that as a roadmap of the structure that you can put in place, and right down to the strategy really for how it becomes not stressful. And I think that's, it's super useful for podcasts, but actually relevant more broadly for business, right? Like a lot of the things that I think that what we're talking about in de-stress your business essentially comes down to is not being stressed by your business ultimately comes down to the structure, the strategy, the fundamental way in which you set up your values that then create the behaviors and the flow and rhythms within your business that either do or do not create stress. If you create a business that has, it lives or dies on one particular event in the year, then it already that create a sort of pattern of how you work, and therefore how you then manage and lead up to that and plan for that and so on. And if you, like, for example, if it's an event, you need sponsors, whether or not you get the sponsor 30 days before or a year and a half before that event makes a huge difference in the stress profile. And I can see with the seasons and so on. One thing to clarify, to check, is you talked there about having set of 10 episodes as a season, and then you've then got your next season and so on. Would you largely expect that the aim is that they immediately follow each other, or would you expect large gaps in between?
The best practice for gaps between seasons is 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
But they're not really gaps. Yeah, and they're not really gaps. Let me be very clear. You're not stopping, right? Because if we're transparent and we're honest, all media is a series of indoctrination propaganda. I'm going to keep going in front of you. I'm going to keep proving that I am the person I say I am. I'm going to keep showing you proof that I'm the person I say I am. I'm going to bring other people to show you proof that I am the person that I say I am. I'm going to keep giving you value to the point in which you finally find me valuable, in which case you buy from me. That's it. That's all we're doing. And to have a 2 to 3 week gap where we're suddenly letting people forget all that value that we just did for 10 solid weeks is ridiculous. It's like calling someone every single day for 3 weeks and then not calling them for 2 3 weeks. You're just losing all that momentum. And the hardest thing is 0 to 1. Whether starting a business or starting a podcast or starting anything, 0 to 1 is the hardest. But after 1, you have inertia. So what do? We have a 2 to 3 week hiatus. 2 to 3 week allowing to look at the data, work out what's going on, but it's not really 2 to 3 weeks. What you're doing in that first week after the season is finished is having a quick episode where you talk monologue to your audience. How have you found that? Because we've seen that had 300 downloads, but only 3 people have given us 5 stars. Is that because you didn't think it was worth 5 stars? Break the fourth wall, go Deadpool. I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you right now, listening to this show. You've taken the time to listen. Where did we go wrong? I'll tell you an easy way to do this. Go to my LinkedIn now and drop me a line. What stopped you from giving me 5 stars? What stopped you from clicking subscribe? What stopped you from commenting? So only 3 things I asked for. I didn't sell you a product, didn't sell you a service, didn't push anything on you. I just asked for it. I didn't get it. I've done something wrong. It's not on you. Tell me what I can do. In the next episode, you want to say, thank you, first and foremost. I've seen quite a few of you have jumped up and pressed subscribe and left a comment. Still, many of you that are listening, I've now seen we've got 700 listeners, but again, only 5 downloads. So I want to talk about what happened in the season that just left, some highlights, some magic moments that I'd love to share with you. And then you just cutting up 3 magic moments or 1 magic moment from each episode, and you break that up into 2 episodes. So now you've got 3 episodes, but it's still just what you did in the previous season. You know, in that last episode, you would have heard me talking to Jason Scott about podcasting and the power of podcasting. What I got from it was working in a de-stressful way, creating environments that don't cause stress. What did you get from the show? And again, if you're loving this and you go back to your thing, you're hammering this idea of 5 stars, subscribe, comment, only on Apple, by the way. Again, the confused mind says no. You want to make it really easy to do one thing. And yes, people are going to say, what if I don't have Apple? Don't worry about those people. That's like business. Someone goes, what if? And I go, well, you don't sell to those people, so you don't care about that. You care about them as humans, but you don't care about them for your business needs. Same with podcasting. Apple has a thing. If they can see compounding growth in a show, and I'm talking minuscule compounding, like 1 listener to 2 listeners to 4 listeners to 8 listeners to 16 listeners, they will help you. They will promote you on likewise shows. Now, if it's a small show, it'll promote you on other small shows, but it's still free promotion from a $1 trillion company. Show me that in any other media. Show me that in any other business. It doesn't exist. So I said, everyone, for the first 2-3 seasons, you're just pushing Apple, because Spotify will not help you. YouTube will not help you. They don't need you as much as everyone else. Apple actually needs you because you're still driving people to their platform. You're still making them relevant. So that you do for those 2-3 weeks. You do a highlight and you do 1 message, 1 action, right? The highlight is, this is what you just missed, and this is what I'd love to get from you. This is what you just missed. This is what I'd love to get from you. Then in your 4th episode or 3rd, depending on how long your break is, you want to say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're still here. We've seen a number jump. We've gone from 1 subscriber to 3 subscribers to 500 subscribers, but we've now got 5,000 downloads and we've blown away. But let me tell you why I want you to subscribe right now, because we've got a whole new season coming up, and I've just finished it in the last 4 weeks, and I have incredible people coming up. People like, and you mentioned some people, or subjects like, and you mentioned some subjects, if the people aren't that big a deal in your particular niche or space. And there are so many magic moments, but you're probably going to miss them if you're not subscribed. And you will miss them if you don't comment, because YouTube won't, or Apple won't drop it down into your downloads. So this is why I'm pushing downloads so hard. But also, I need to be very honest with you. I'm pushing downloads and subscribers hard, and comments, mostly comments, because when I'm trying to get these great people on my show to help you, I want to say my audience is the most engaged. I might not have the most audience because I'm not up against Stephen Bartlett, but he's only got 125 reviews and already have 30 reviews, and I'm only in season 1.
Nice.
Join my team, join my army, and you want to have a mission, a value, a purpose that you get everyone on. So in your case, de-stress. I want to support you de-stress. I need you to subscribe. And I'll give you a free piece of info that most people don't know. Apple's entire charts are not based on downloads. They're not based on how many subscribers. They're purely based on how many people have given you 5 compared to 5 stars, commented, and press subscribe. Those 4 metrics are the only things they're looking at. And then compounding over a period of time, because everyone knows mathematically you can't compound forever. So you're always just going to have this window where you jump and then you normally fall off or you plateau.
Wow. I love that. So firstly, thank you for sharing behind the curtain on a lot of that, because I think that stuff is non-obvious to someone that's outside of the industry, including myself, really, because although I mentioned before, this is like the 2nd podcast I've hosted, I've done many episodes, and yet there's not a lot of openness out there in the industry about what it actually looks like. And it's
Absolutely.
interesting when I talk to other podcasters about things like number of listeners and all those sorts of things, and you can end up quite surprised at how low some shows that you like perhaps look up to, listen to, or aware of, or whatever, and then you hear the number of downloads, etc. You're like, oh, it's actually not as much. And it's interesting, as you say, focus more on the engagement of your audience rather than the size of your audience, and A, that's a better thing anyway, and B, that will then drive more engagement over time anyway, because things like, moving up the rankings. So that is just,
you've got to remember, there's so much, because we've got other social medias. If we were only on podcasts, we would probably not be as blown away by the numbers. But when we compare it to our friend who has a TikTok video that has 20,000, 50,000, suddenly our little 400-person show seems really insignificant. And I have 2 things about this that sometimes get me in trouble. So I want to trigger warning to anyone listening. Instead of thinking about the power of the number of your followers, I want you to think about the power of the follower. I'd rather be JC than Hitler. Hitler had millions of followers. JC had 12, right? But those 12 followers were powerful enough to write books, to spread his message, to go out there and do the work that needs to be done, to create a legacy that still to this day, thousands of years later, is still continuing. So what happened to that? The power of the listener. And the same when you run a business. And I always say, podcasting is business, and you should have a business podcast. It's not important about every single other person about your product. It's about the person that's going to care about your product enough to buy it and then tell other people about it, so that your cost of getting another customer goes lower. In a perfect world, every single business owner would only have to sell a product once. And the product would be so good that we just keep buying it, and we tell other people about buying it. I have these ridiculous highlighting pens. For those who are sight impaired or not watching this and listening to it, I'm holding up a highlighter. It is the exact same highlighter I've been using since 1993. They only had to sell me once on this make, this type, this handheld, this color, and I go out and buy it. Bic Pens has not innovated since it came up with the original ballpoint Bic pen. Why? They found a great business, and they knew if they just gave you once, it would create enough power around it that you would just keep buying it. And I think we forget that. So same thing with podcasting. Like, if your message is strong enough, if you are helping enough, then I become a fan, I become an ambassador, I run out and tell other people, I want to support your business. I'm finding ways to keep you alive and around in my life. So that's the power of podcasting. And you're right, like, I'm behind the curtain a little bit every now and then, and I see some of these numbers and I think, wow, I thought it would be in the millions or the multi-millions. I was on stage with Lewis Howes, and he had just off Ellen DeGeneres, 120 million downloads. I had just hit 2,500. And I was thinking, why in the world am I going on stage after this guy? And they asked me to be on stage. I didn't apply for it. I didn't ask, to be honest. And I had nothing to sell, nothing to promote. And I was just thinking, this is ridiculous. And he said it from stage. He said, by the way, it took me 5 years to make money from my podcast. And I thought, wow, I made money from episode 11, and I never stopped after that. Like, it took me exactly 10 episodes, one season, to realize, to monetize. That was the answer. It allowed me to keep doing this thing that I loved. And again, it made it less stressful because I was getting rewarded. Fiscally rewarded, because vanity's great. How many followers, how many subscribers? But if you're not paying my bills or paying my holiday or allowing me to support the things that I care about, I'm less involved. I'm less caring. I want to share less of my most valuable resource, which is my time, with this medium or with these strangers on the internet. So that was a massive thing for me, that he had spent so long trying to work out how to monetize this machine.
Really interesting. And I think it's, as you say, there are so many different models for it, and you can't see from the outside what's up. A friend of mine runs a podcast which has had sponsorship relatively early on in its journey, equivalent to a significant amount when we're talking more than a person's salary for a year. That means that you look at something like that and go, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of money, creating a podcast like this, it's the editing and all these sorts of things. It becomes a lot easier as soon as you start kind of getting to the point where you can monetize it, as you say, and reduce some of that stress as well. So we've talked a bit about how to manage perhaps some of the time investment and discipline and so on, by initially starting off with that season and doing like 10 episodes, which gives you a bit of creative focus, allows you to kind of chart, okay, what needs to be in this, and as you say, you're focused around getting your audience, which helps that it's not trying to make it a super successful thing's going to make you loads of money in a single series. So doing that, then as you said, looking at the data and engaging with your audience to get feedback, and also encourage them to give you the reviews and so on. Out of interest on that feedback, before we kind of move on to later on the journey, one of the things that I think some people are perhaps struggle with, whether it's building a business or a podcast, is that sense of, firstly, being nervous of what feedback they're going to get. Secondly, thinking that they already know what's terrible about their product or service and what needs to change. Therefore, why bother asking? They'll just tell me the thing I already know. Have you got perhaps an example of where listener insights have led you or one of your clients to kind of pivot or adapt their approach in really?
That's interesting. This is another very controversial opinion. Do you ever go to an orchestra? You ever go see a choir in motion? The choir master, the maestro, well, he has his back to the audience. He doesn't care what your response is. He's working with his instruments. He's working with his melody. He's working against a recipe, a ingredient chain of the certain words and certain instruments at a certain time, in a certain way, at a certain cadence. that creates a piece of art. And the art has value purely because they have decided it has value. It has nothing to do with their audience. I say that to every single person I work with. It has not, I don't even tell people to look at the audience numbers until season 3. It's not about that at all. At all. It doesn't make a difference. Like I have a podcaster who did 7 figures on his podcast, and we shared a stage together, a talk a little while back. I think I've actually have him on my Instagram talking, and he said, Jason's piece of advice to me, which I couldn't believe, was don't care if you don't have a single listener. I will show you how to make money out of this podcast. And my first interview was James Goldsmith in London, and it was about this beautiful building, 22 Bishopsgate, which is the tallest commercial building in the UK. And I was sitting in the room when he did that interview, and he finished the podcast, and he said, okay, well, do you think that would do well? And I said, stop. Who does it have to do well for you to think this episode you did was success? And he went, oh, James, myself, and if I can turn this into a business deal that will feed my family. So then that has nothing to do with your audience. Absolutely nothing. Your audience isn't going to change that storyline at all. And interestingly enough, he did. James later on not only got him into 22 Bishopsgate, he set up an office for, but he also he's now a business partner as they move forward. And also he's now on his 13th season of that show, and he does have a massive audience, over 250,000. And he has a secondary show because we've worked out the ways in which you can do it. But forget about your audience. Forget about what they say and do. That's not what art is. Lots of people think books are terrible, poems are terrible, artwork is ridiculous. It doesn't change the value at all. Rick Rubin did an entire book on this. It's about you. It's about deciding what the metric of success. And I say this to everyone. I'm starting a business, starting a podcast. Choose your metric of success. You and I connected because you wrote a comment under one of my clients, one of my students, actually, not a client, but a student, because Brody Files, they did the podcast course. And you said something about stressful. And I said, I'm not stressed at all. I run a 7-figure company with no staff. And you're like, oh, that's quite a surprise. And I thought, well, probably it's not because I've built it that way. I purposely worked out what my metric of success is. My metric of success is no stress and freedom. That's it. And my focus on freedom. And from freedom, I get no stress. Doesn't mean I'm not blocked on airports or have issues about leaving people or leaving friends or trying different things or a million other small things. But my work does it because I've worked backwards. I've said, this is my metric of success, freedom. I have to always work backwards from there. Everything else is a distraction. The word priority was bastardized in the 90s. It just meant one thing, to prioritize, to have priority. It wasn't priorities. You didn't have lots of them. You had one. You chose one thing to give your life to, one thing to make it your sole purpose. So for those people worried about your podcast, don't worry about it. Your first thing that you should be doing is working out what your business model is, and then treat a podcast as a hybrid of an email and social media. An email's greatest gift is it gives us one-to-one opportunity to communicate. Social media's greatest gift is it gives us the communicator go one to many, right? That's it. Podcast does both. I can sit here right now and talk to you, Alex, while at the same time this gets go out to people I've never spoken to, never have a connection with, and then you cut that up and it goes onto a multitude of channels, all with extra work. And that's another thing I would say. You mentioned it earlier brilliantly, is this idea of having processes, having a formula, because once it's in your diary, once it's part of work week, you're no longer thinking about it. It's just Mondays, I do a podcast. Tuesdays, I edit a podcast. Wednesday, my podcast live. Thursdays, I break that up into a newsletter from the podcast script. Then I take that and I break that up into smaller chunks using AI, and that becomes my Twitter storm. Then I break that up and that becomes my thread. Then I break that up to an image and that becomes my Instagram picture. Then I break that up and turn that into a video and becomes my Instagram story. Then I take the Instagram story and it becomes my TikTok. Then my TikTok becomes my YouTube short. And it's the same piece of work. I'm just moving it from one folder to the next folder on a day at a time that's pre-decided. So there's no decision fatigue for me. There's no extra stress. I either do it myself or I pay a VA to come in and just move things from folder 1 to folder 2 to folder 3 to folder 4. Done to do. Done to do. I tell everyone, when I became an investor, everyone kept talking about deal flow. And for ages, I didn't understand deal flow the way they understood deal flow. Deal flow, where I come from and the way I build businesses and podcasts, is this idea of delegate as much as you can that you personally do. Eliminate anything that doesn't actually make you money or make you a fan or find you someone that's interested in your work. Automate as much as humanly possible using AI, using processes. And then liberate yourself completely so you don't have to do much of it at all, except the part that you're really good at. That's what deal flow is, DEAL. And the flow is to keep that flow going for as long as possible, so you're not starting from zero. And that's sometimes I sold 2 businesses in the last 2 years, and I completely forgot about deal flow, because the flow part is the fact that now that I don't have a business, whenever I start next, I have to start working out those same, where does it go? Who does it go to? How long does it be there? Like all that stuff again, because I have no flow. I'm starting at zero again, and I've got to go zero to one, and one to two, and two to three, etc. So having a process will help. Knowing that you take one piece of content and make it to multiple. Knowing that if you're talking directly to one person, it doesn't make a difference what the audience thinks at all. The audience will find value if your guest finds value, if you find value. If you're giving information, or if you're getting information that is easy to share, they will find information, because you are the first fan, right? You are paying with your attention and your time before anyone pays for attention or time. So that's how you should treat your podcast or your business.
Nice. I really like that. And it's interesting that you talk about the client of yours that went and the interview at Bishopsgate. And were you suggesting there that to some extent the goal in that case, the interview host's goal, is actually to build the relationship with that interviewee and create the access, as we talked about earlier, for future business opportunities? Is that where actually the expectation of monetization should come from, rather than long-term monetization of an audience?
So there's 2 parts to that, and I'm gonna do the part that you didn't ask directly, but that was kind of mentioned in your question, which is the part of asking the questions. You have to realize you're running a business podcast, which is what we're referring to, not a hobby podcast. It's very different. A hobby podcast is about being interested in something and asking questions to solve your interest. So I'm interested in a film, and it's a hobby podcast about films, and I'm going to ask you what's your favorite film, and I'm going to ask you what your favorite scene of that film was, and I don't actually know your answer. I'm interested in finding out your answer. When you do a business podcast, you should not act as if that is the case. You should know that if I'm interviewing Scott Galloway starts his book by talking about the 4 things that allow for great wealth creation: stoicism, diversification, focus, and time. So I ask questions knowing the answer, because by knowing the answer, I can drive a narrative. I can create a good story. Because the book is the story. He's already taken the time. Teams have taken the time. Publishers taken the time. Ghostwriters taken the time. Yeah. So a book is a great example. And if you want to really, as a podcast business owner, if you really want to sort of test this, get the Jimmy Carr book that he just wrote, the autobiography, and then watch the Steve Bartlett Diary of a CEO. He literally is asking questions chapter by chapter, page by page. Jimmy knows the answers because Jimmy wrote the book. So he knows when the jokes fall in. He knows when to add the big value bomb. He knows when to drop and it works beautifully as a story because the hero's journey has been worked out. The hero's journey, and again, if those people don't know the hero's journey, long story short, just watch Spider-Man 1. Any of the Spider-Man ones, it's the hero's journey. He's an introvert. Something terrible happens. The spider bites him. He has what's called an intrinsic problem. He doesn't think he's good enough. He solves that. He has an extrinsic problem. He doesn't think the world will accept him. He solves that. Then something terrible happens, which is called the aha moment, where his uncle dies, which then leads to the one line that everyone can remember: with great power comes great responsibility, which is the shareable one line, which then gets given to your audience, that your audience can remember when the film ends. That's the thing they share, which then therefore brings an audience, new audience, to the film to see it again, to find out what this line means or why it's important. It's Rocky, it's the hero's journey, right? It's a series of questions. So that's the first thing. Understand when you're interviewing, you already should know what the questions are, what they should answer, that leads you to the next question, that leads you to the next answer, that leads you to the next question, that gives enough value to your audience, that your audience can go away and tell other people about it to drive a new audience to come and listen to your show. That's number one. That's the question. Then your question was about monetization. The truth is, although there are 37 ways to make money from a podcast, they kind of start what I call the core 4 or core 5. I am calculaxic. That means my numbers are terrible, but allow me to try. The first time you do sales on a podcast or make money from a podcast is selling directly from me to you. I got a show and I know that you have an event coming up and I would love to speak at your event. I know that you pay speakers £5,000. So I've already told myself that the value of this talk is to get £5,000 from your pocket into my pocket. So during our talk, with questions that I've already worked out, I'm going to highlight my expertise. I'm going to drop social proof. I might drop some name recognition. I might drop some things that might interest you. I've already done a little bit of homework where I've looked at your LinkedIn, I've looked at your social medias, I've read some of your articles. I know what you care about, and I'm going to start bringing it up. I did a talk in Turkey. How important is a large audience? Like the large audience I just did in Vegas for 12,000 people. Tell me about the current budget that you're paying speakers, because I know personally I take about 5,000. So I'm doing this
Nice.
to give you, right? And at the same time, I'm trying to make you smile, I'm trying to make you interested. So when the podcast ends, I get to do a follow-up email with you, and that's the magic. I get to say, hey, that was great. On the podcast also, you mentioned how hard it was to find a speaker. I don't know if I dropped this in, but I'm a speaker. And you're like, oh, yeah, you mentioned that about 12 times. I go, great. And did you find value? And then let's say you say, no, thanks. I don't need you right now. Great. But now I've got another week or 2 weeks, depending on your editing schedule, to come back to you and go, guess what? Your show's about to go live. Here's some links to the show. Here's some dropped, photo, audio wave file, whatever it is you want to create. And some things you can copy and paste straight that say things like, what a great talker, and you keep using these words. What a great speaker. Really enjoyed talking about speaking events, really talked about events. Now the person's looking at it again, and you can say again, by the way, you've got an event coming up. I'd love to buy some tickets. I'd love to support. Besides being a speaker, what else can I do to support you? So again, you're reminding them. Then you have a third one. By the way, you're now live. Here's some of the audience responses we've had. So you've got a chance to start a relationship. James and Caleb, we use that as an example. It took them a while for them to keep finding reasons to get back in his ecosystem. Because when you're cold calling someone who owns a building in London and say, hi, by the way, I have an idea for an office space. I think I'd like to come in to a building you spend a couple of million on. I think I'm smarter than you, even though I don't have a couple of million. I don't have any buildings to prove it. Put the phone down. Yeah. But I've got 30 minutes to impress you, 30 minutes to entertain you, 30 minutes to educate you, 30 minutes to start a relationship that I can do follow-up after follow-up after follow-up over the next weeks and months. I can send a card to say, by the way, thank you so much. I can send a gift. I can start something called reciprocity, which is what I keep giving, and you suddenly feel like, oh my God, I have to give this guy something. So you give me back, and we start this relationship of value exchange. I think if you break your show into 3 parts, the first part is how much value can you give to your audience? The second part is how much value can you give to your guest? And the third part is what can I get from myself that even if it doesn't go anywhere, doesn't help anyone, doesn't impress my guest, I still can walk away knowing the answer to this question that's been driving me. I once started a podcast, the Make Money podcast. Its only job was to get me on a call for 30 minutes with this guy, Dan Fleischman, who's the youngest person ever on the London Stock Exchange. I could not get him on a cold call. I could not get him on an email. I could not direct message him. Him and the Kardashians are hanging out. He's spends 200 million on influencer marketing. He's just blew up, like absolutely blew up. And I've been following him for years and years and years. And I literally knew that if I started a show about money, he was obsessed with money, I would eventually get him on if I could just get every single one of his friends on and impress them. That they would eventually go, well, why aren't you on Jason's show? It took me 2 seasons. And in fact, he starts the show by going, this took 5 years. And I was like, yep, and worth it. Absolutely. All my questions were about me. I didn't care about my audience. I didn't care if no one else got information. I was like, I'm going to be on a 30-minute call with some kid who built this insane 8-figure business just because they wanted to, for no other reason. And I was like, yeah, it'll be worth it. And I closed the whole podcast down after I did that episode. There was no other reason to keep going. I was like, that was it. That was my whole, I think I actually ended up doing one more season because someone paid me. Okay, so number 1, I sell directly to you. Number 2 is access to you, right? I say to someone, you're a massive mobile mic company. I'm about to have this guy on who does events. How would you feel about getting access to him? Have you tried to get hold of him we tried to get hold of him, we can't get a cold call through, he doesn't answer our email, he hasn't got our direct messages. Great. I'm going to mention you during our podcast. And if he says he's never heard of you, I'm going to do an email introduction to the both of you after the episode's finished. How much is that worth to you? Well, our cost of client acquisition, in other words, how much it costs to get someone to look at our product and service is $300. Great, I'm going to charge you $300 for that. Did you know for $3,000, you can sponsor the season, and the season is all about event organizers that book speakers who need mobile mics. Oh, wow. Okay, well, that's still only $300 an episode. Well, what if I made you a deal? Because it's a brand new season, But, and also, for why it's $3,000 is because you can give me 2 people you'd like to get in front of, and I'll get them on the podcast, and I'll do an introduction.
Nice.
Excellent. That's access. Number 3, you have an audience, right? So perhaps your audience, and that could be your actual audience, people that follow you on social media, but it could be your audiences in your peer network that also books events and speakers, etc. Now I get a chance to sell to them directly. Because they'll say things like, so what other events have you done? Who else have you worked with? What speakers did they look for? And then I want to drive the pain up. How hard is it to find diversity speakers? How hard is it to find speakers who've had successes as, and I'm working that. And then I can say to you, by the way, can you give me 2 or 3 names? Can you give me the warm introduction? There's my access.
Wow.
Then there's access directly to your audience. In other words, by you promoting on my email number 2, which says, here's the link to the show and here's some social media assets, you're driving your other audience directly to me. So I get to monetize that audience because they already know, like, and trust you. They don't like and trust me, so it's harder, but they'll like, trust you, and I'm hijacking your social proof. I'm leveraging your value, your trust, all the stuff around you to bring it to me. And I know that I've done a good enough job in the podcast where I've made it sound like you and I are equal, even though we're not. You're an expert in your space and I'm only an expert in my little niche, but I've done a good enough job in working out the hero's journey and the 8 arcs. Then you've got your own audience that you're building up to sell to because they're listening to you week after week after week, proving that what you are. And I say this to everyone, if you give enough value in public, you will get asked in private, how much that costs if I used to do it one-on-one? How much that costs if you come in and speak at my company? How much would that cost? That's your monetization right there. Doesn't make a difference if you got an advertiser or not. But then you can also go another step, which is we talked about before, which is this idea of organic mention. So what does that look like? I say, I'm talking to someone today who deals with stress. Are there 5 companies that I believe in, or better yet, 10 companies that I believe in that deal with maybe a fidget machine, some sort of stress practice, a stress wellness retreat? And I say, at the end of my show, I'm going to have 10 quick fire questions where I ask them 10 questions about stress. In each one, I can mention a company, product, or service that costs $250. Would you like to sponsor it? 10 questions, $2,500 per episode, 10 episodes, $25,000. And I've made it. And all I do is start every episode by saying, we've come to the end of our show. We've got 10 quick fire questions. My favorite stress relief thing is this fidget spinner. Because it's organically mentioned, I don't legally have to say this is an advert, or this is a sponsored mention, or this is a product endorsement, or this is a product placement. I can simply say this is because I do use it, and I can use niche companies that are in my area, in my community, or in my space, and I can charge them such a small fee that the procurement or the agency or the marketing can sign it off because it's less than $4.99, which seems to be the magic number. And because I've got 10 of them, I have 10 opportunities. And again, I can say it's $250 for the one question, but did you know it's $3,000 and you get to sponsor a whole season? And they go, oh, it's only $500 more. I get mentioned every single time. And I'll do an email introduction to you and the guest. And you can choose 2 guests, which I'll do the work of getting in front of them. And you ask me some questions that you'd like to find out from them. So when you do your sales call, you already know their pain points. So you can say, oh, on that call, Jason, you mentioned how tough it is to do X. Guess what we do as a product or service? We provide X. That's cheaper, it's faster, it's quicker. And then there you go. That was well worth. Let's give them more money. Let's get more sponsorship. I'll give you a quick example, and I know there's a lot of value there. And sometimes I know I say, like, someone could say I need a glass of water, and I pull out a hose pipe from the fireman's thing and stick it straight in your mouth. But I remember my second season, I had a sponsor come in at like $20,000, and I thought, I wonder if I could get them to $100,000. Like, what would I need to do to get them to pay $100,000 to sponsor the show? And it's in its second season, right? I haven't got a massive audience. I think I had maybe 1,000 people listen to that podcast. And what I said was, I'll tell you what, I think you've got something. I'd like you to pay $100,000, but I'm going to create a 1-page lead magnet. I'm going to do your copyright. I put in the thing. I'm going to work out how to bring it up in the show. I want you to tell me the 5 people that you think would make the biggest difference to your business if only you could get in front of them. So I got the Dream 100, right? The people that just by getting in front of can change the trajectory of your life, your business. I'll get them on my podcast. I will get to sell them to them directly. Then make sure to follow up with you. I can also do lost leading. I created an entire marketing little machine for them and said, here's all the things I can do for $100,000. And I'll do a live podcast where you can invite people to come. I'll invite people to come. So then I can put you face to face with your exact audience, your exact clients. They said, yeah, done. We'll pay for that. And that was a little show called Smarter Event Planning, which was EAs and PAs. And I just knew that they had such a problem getting in front of that audience. And I was like, okay, here's what I can do. I can do a 1-page, I can do lost leader, I can do resources from the show, I can get certain people involved. And you have the PA show coming up, so I can drive traffic to that. And I can, so yeah, sometimes you just got to add whatever your unique thing is. Maybe it's sales, it's marketing, maybe it's good product, maybe it's good copywriting. Try and think of a way to work that in. And then just value stack, just have a lot of value that you're giving, as opposed to just, you get to get mentioned at the start of my show, and you get mentioned at the middle of my show, and you get mentioned at the end of my show, which is what most people do when they sell advertising.
That's amazing advice. I feel like this has instantly become an episode that demands rewatching to pick those things out, because I think what you're demonstrating, wow, in multiple levels of. So one is your level of expertise and how you can layer up the complexity of this, because I think that's one of the things that is important for people to take away is don't get overwhelmed by quite how genius what Jason's just shared is, because I think that would be easy to do, right? It's easy to look at that and just go, I like this is god level podcasting. How the hell do I do this? And I think it is something you can layer up, and it's something you can get support on and so on. I think also the thing that really shines through for me is the level of strategic planning and thinking that's going on there. Like you said early on the episode, you talked about how you're the kind of guy that if you've got to chop down a tree, you're going to spend the 6 hours sharpening the axe to the saw before you do it. And I see that. I see that in this level of planning and thinking where you're thinking about who's the audience, who do I need access to, how am I going to turn that in the 5,000, the 10,000, the 20,000, and beyond, and everything that's lined up. I think then when you go right back to a little tactic like, it feels funny to refer this to as a little tactic when I think it's such a useful thing, is like a little tactic, like let's do a 10 episode season. Suddenly it becomes so much easier to think, well, this is how I'm going to work strategically to get this result. And I think that's just amazing. I could talk to you for a lot longer and ask you a lot of questions, but we're timing out. So it's entirely possible, Jason, perhaps ask whether I can get you back to go on some specific detail area that I've got thoughts on. The other thing that I'd love to do is we've talked quite a bit about process. I'd love to essentially take some of the things that you've talked about, turn it into some step-by-step AirManual checklists, and basically provide people as a thing that they can go get in a link of this episode of here's some of the processes of both the strategic thinking up front, but also what does it look like to take your content, repurpose it, and use it in social in the ways that you did. So with your permission, at some point, I'd love to do that if you're up for that, Jason. Marvelous. But also, there's so much that people can learn from you. There's your website, jasonallanscott.uk. You've got numerous podcasts that you've done over time. What's the one that you'd recommend that most people, in terms of listeners to this podcast, should go check out? And also make sure that we include your link to your LinkedIn profile as well in our show.
Thank you. Yeah, get me on LinkedIn. It's probably the one of the only places where I don't have a VA responding on my behalf, which is fine. They all say, responding. None of them are pretending to be me. The Guesses podcast is great because you get to hear me literally, episode 10, my ex-wife and I at the back of a car, and she's just going, close the podcast, close everything down. This is a fiasco. My venue, my company was collapsed. So that's a really good learning to go. I went on to turn that podcast into one of the top 100 most profitable businesses in the whole of the UK. Went to number 10 Downing Street for it, and all I had was a laptop, a microphone, internet connection, much like now. And so that's a good one. I think more than anything, I say this to everyone, and I think it's so important, whether you follow me or not is less important to me. What's important to me is that instead of sometimes we're always pushing action because we all think action is the enemy of thought. We can just keep doing, we can work it out, iterate, take the time to think, take the time to stop, take the time to think about how this affects everything else, because it is a flywheel. Saying yes to one thing is saying no to another. Saying yes to a meeting is also saying yes to getting to that meeting, getting dressed for that meeting, the travel to that meeting, being prepared for that meeting. Really think about your actions and what they're leading you to, and that there is a finite amount of actions you are capable of in a finite amount of time. And some of the things are just not worth it. The exchange is just not worth it. I tell everyone, to start a TikTok channel, to get all these views, to make no money, doesn't seem worth it to me. Maybe it is to you. But a podcast, I believe, at this point anyway, because no one has yet worked a way to cheat it, has a very simple algorithm that doesn't work against you, that anyone can use, that's easily replicable, that allows you to sell directly, whether someone listens or nobody listens. Gives you a chance to learn every single day, to meet great people. It creates this connection network, which is unbelievable, of real people, face to face, not bots. Bots are liking our stuff and interacting with our goods. So that's my biggest takeaway. And I'm on LinkedIn and I try and share as much as I can. I have got another podcast coming very soon, but I haven't yet launched it. It's going to be, the idea is exactly this. It's to see how much value can I possibly create in a way, like you said beautifully at the end of your talk, which was having a process sheet, right, where someone can just go to and tick it off, because there is so much information. 9 years of podcasting, 20 years of media training. It's hard for me to sort of get it all out. And also because you and I both know it's so nuanced. It's not sometimes just going, you get a mic, you get a laptop, like the mic might be different depending on your needs. The laptop will be different. The way you talk might be different. There are certain things that everyone has, but there's so much nuance in this. And I know that nuance doesn't sell. People love polarizing messages. So here's my polarized message to you. You have a limited amount of time. In the end, only three things actually count. Did you live? Did you love? And did you matter? Everything else is Fabregazi. It's fairy dust. So decide what fairy dust you want to play with.
Love it. Thank you, Jason. Well, we've come to the end of this episode, and I'm a beginner in this space. You're the expert. How should we be ending a podcast like this one? Should we be using calls to action? What should they be? Help me out.
Well, thank you so much. Well, a confused mind says no. It's one of the greatest things to remember. It's one of my mantras. So one call to action, one thing to do. So I would tell people to go to Apple, where you find the greatest shows, find this particular link, which if you listen to, you already know where it is, but make sure to subscribe. You don't need to do anything else. If you just subscribe, you've done enough. However, if you can give us 5 stars, that shows that we're bringing in the right guests, you're having the right conversations, you really are bringing the best you can do. Anything less than 5 stars, don't even put it there. But go into the comments and say you could have done this. But in a perfect world, to subscribe, to give 5 stars, and leave a comment, even if it's one word: great, terrible, demanding, motivating, inspiring, exhausting. Just one word. That's all you need. Will make such a difference to the show. It allows more people to find out about it, and allows you to get people far better than me to come on the show and share with your audience. You don't have to nod your head when I said far better than me.
I was thinking, the nodding was me thinking it's going to be difficult. It's been a very good episode. That's awesome. Thank you, Jason. And as a result, yes, please go do that. Find De-Stress Your Business podcast on Apple and do exactly as Jason just said, please. That'd be absolutely fantastic. But thank you, Jason. It's been great talking to you and to everyone else. Until next time, have fun.